Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Steve Saretsky. He's a Vancouver-based realtor. You can find him online at stevesaretsky.com. Welcome back to the show, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Has the latest issue of the Saretsky report been released yet?
Yeah, we are all set as usual, so that's just on my website there. It's at stevesaretsky.com.
What's the latest on the Metro Vancouver real estate housing market?
Yeah, it's kind of a continuation of what we see. Like, we had that obviously a really busy spring market. Summer market kind of went through a slowdown, a lull, so to speak, which I think we've covered a few times on the show, and now, following a seasonal real estate pattern, it always picks up September, October, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now. So, that's, the market's back in sort of full swing right now. You're sort of back to similar conditions that we've been seeing really over the past 18 months, which is multiple offers, bidding wars for the entry-level product, and just overall a market that continues to be short on housing supply.
Are properties still selling significantly over the asking price?
Yeah. I don't have the exact data in front of me, but last time I checked, I think it was the single-family market was over close to around 60% of homes selling above the asking price, and it's going to be along those lines here today. The entry-level product, basically anything that the sad reality is in Vancouver is that a detached home, anything under $2 million. I mean, that's all in multiple offers because that's kind of your entry-level point. So that remains extremely competitive.
Wow. Can you imagine just a few years ago if you said 2 million would kind of be your benchmark?
Yeah, it's kind of never ceases to amaze, but again, kind of keeps going. So
some high-end properties have been selling. Any thoughts on where this big money is coming from?
I don't really focus too much on that market, but just conversations with colleagues and stuff that, maybe do a little more on the high-end luxury side, West Vancouver, that sort of thing. Again, seems to be predominantly local money. And again, local Chinese, so to speak, right? Like people that are already here. It's not like, this notion of maybe like a 2015, 16, where, I think everybody's well aware that we had, a significant amount of, offshore capital coming in, people that didn't necessarily live here. That was kind of the peak foreign investment. I mean, at the end of the day, the borders are still, for the most part, maybe not closed, but very difficult to access. And, international travel is certainly not rebounded. So, it remains to be largely a local market here.
Is fear of missing out still playing a major role in the real estate market?
I feel like that's kind of faded. That was like really evident in, the start of 2021, January, February through into March. That's when home prices were going up. I think we had about 3%, price growth per month, right? So if you start seeing 3% price growth a month, I mean, if you wait 3 months, you're looking at pretty much a 10% run up, which could price a young family out of the housing market. So there's this element of a fear of getting priced out, because again, you think about it, you're talking about, a 10% move on a $1.5 million home. It's not a small chunk of change. So, we don't really have that today. I don't really think there's a sense of fear of missing out, like I got to buy right now. But I think that people are still, fairly desperate to upsize. That still is the popular trend. And there's still, frustrated buyers that, lost in multiple homes and are competing to try to find one. So it's still a competitive environment, but I don't get the same sense that there's this pressing urgency to do something right here, right now.
Now, I was told by some people not too long ago, Vancouver had a glut of condos. Does it have a glut of condos? And if there is it a certain segment?
Well, no. I mean, right now, like if you look at it, I mean, the condo inventory, for example, is, I think it's running at like close to 5-year low right now. So that's, I'm talking about resale value. So inventory right now is basically the lowest it's been since about 2017, which if you remember was a pretty strong housing market. So not a whole lot of condo inventory per se. I mean, we're hovering around just over 2 months of inventory, around 2. So, what you do have is, I think maybe what people are referring to is you have, a record number of new apartments under construction, and we've got record number of apartment completions. So a lot of the new housing supply in the pipeline, is being built and is being completed. So naturally, you think that would help and add to the resale supply. I mean, it really hasn't impacted the numbers a whole lot. Like I said, when you're sitting at around 2.2, I think, months of inventory in the condo market, that's indicative of a buyer's market. That's indicative of higher prices, and that's what we're seeing. I think the condo market's actually playing some catch up right now. Officially prices up, 7.5%. But again, certain segments, if you go out into this sort of, under the fringes of the city, condo prices are up 10, 15%. And then if you go into, obviously, we still know the downtown core, it's recovering. It's certainly a much, much better market today, but it still hasn't really seen a whole lot of price growth over the past 18 months.
Was there really any kind of rush out of central Vancouver seeking a bigger detached home out in the suburbs?
Yeah, well, I mean, the suburbs have done the best. So, I mean, I think that, people feel that they don't have to go back to the office in the same capacity moving forward. And so obviously, you could sell your 2-bedroom condo in the city here for 1.1. You get a decent house out in the suburbs for 1.4. That's been an attractive option. And so what we've seen is, the Fraser Valley, for example, Fraser Valley detached homes are up 31%, over the past year. So that's really where you've seen the most price appreciation. And, right now that trend is still ongoing. So
are realtors being pressured to get the COVID vaccination?
No, we haven't had any push from industry or any sort of memos. It's, yours to make the decision. And so there hasn't been any sort of discussion around that.
Is the vaccinated versus vaccinated narrative, along with the Delta variant scare, causing people to buy, sell, or hold homes? No, not really. I mean, I think that, really, I mean, this whole COVID situation on the housing market, it stopped our housing market for 2 months at the onset back in, 2020. And ever since then, it's just, I would argue, has helped drive sales activity, with people relocating for obvious reasons. And obviously, I think maybe withholding some of the house inventory, for example. I mean, I think that there's obviously a preference for larger spaces, and that's sort of created this imbalance, particularly in the detached and townhouse markets where people are looking for more space, and that's created sort of supply constraints in those two segments of the market, which have obviously benefited the most in terms of price appreciation over, again, since the onset of the pandemic. We'll have more with Steve Saretsky right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Steve Saretsky. Steve, could the Evergrand Group problems in China affect real estate in Vancouver?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's something that everybody's, watching. Well, I mean, I think astute watchers are keeping an eye on it. I don't think anybody really knows how it's going to play out or what's going to happen. And, but yeah, I think there's certainly, I think everybody's well aware that in Vancouver, there's certainly a lot of ties to China, and we certainly have some investment, that is correlated with what happens in China and their domestic economy, and these things are correlated. Evergrande, I think, has over 1 million pre-sale homes under construction with deposits on them. I mean, I would imagine there's at least some of those investors that not only have a pre-sale with Evergrande, but they probably have a pre-sale here in Vancouver that is waiting for completion as well. So, I think there's always going to be some knock-on effects. I think when one of the largest property developers in a massive, the second largest economy in the world, takes a stumble, I think that for sure could have ripple effects. I just don't know what those are. All I could say is right now we're not seeing them in the housing market. I'm not really hearing any discussion of, people suddenly selling their homes or walking away from pre-sales or pre-sale activity for that matter, being, suddenly weak. We're not seeing any of that from a feet on the ground perspective or in any of the data. But, again, it's early, so it's definitely worth watching.
Has immigration played an integral role in high real estate prices?
Yeah, I think, for sure it has. I think if you ramp up, immigration or, you set these high immigration targets, which, the current government has, if you don't have an adequate housing supply strategy in place, then of course that's going to result in higher home prices. And, I think that's probably, in my opinion, it's been a policy failure, of the Liberal government, really. You can ramp up immigration targets, which is all great, but at the end of the day, there was no housing supply strategy in place. And, clearly I think it's interesting to see that there's very little discussion, particularly in this upcoming election here, is around immigration targets. Because if you do, my opinion is if you have a housing crisis, the first thing you should do is probably get the housing crisis sorted out, adequately house the cohort, the citizenship that you represent, and then, focus on ramping immigration back up. So I'm not saying you shut it off to zero, but, maybe instead of 400,000, maybe you turn that knob down to 350K, and maybe you implement a plan to work with municipalities to fast track, new housing starts. So, at the end of the day, I think it was a policy failure. Clearly a lot of the immigration is funneling into the large major cities where, there's the most job opportunity, in Vancouver and Toronto and the major cities there. And, there just simply wasn't enough housing that was being constructed. And again, that's not necessarily a federal problem. It is a municipal problem, as they seem to be the largest bottleneck in terms of getting new construction to market.
Yeah. Now, I'm just trying to look up what cities in Canada are near, because I think 300,000 in population. And something, it's a weird number, because we have a lot of cities in Canada around 200,000, and then you either are that size or smaller, or you jump up to 600,000, like Vancouver or Winnipeg, and then Calgary, Edmonton. But we don't have anybody really who's around 300,000. So, but it's like adding a Kamloops and a Burnaby to the Canadian population every year if you're bringing in 300,000 people.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I think it's been a policy mistake. Maybe perhaps it was well-intentioned, but, I just think that you've got a housing crisis here, and I don't think there's really any level of government, as much as they talk about wanting to solve it, I don't actually think that they're putting in the right policies to solve it. I think there's an important distinction to make, that unlike, the United States, in Canada, you don't really have a whole ton of options. Most people that immigrate here or what have you, they tend to, like, where do they go? I mean, they go to Vancouver, they go to Toronto. Okay, you can throw in, maybe Montreal, but you got to be bilingual. You can sprinkle in Ottawa, and you can sprinkle in, maybe Calgary. But for the most part, they really funnel into they funnel into two cities. Whereas, United States, you look at it, I mean, you've got all these fantastic options, right? You got Boston, New York, Miami, Houston, and, Arizona, like the list goes on. And you have these large major metro cities where, it's very common in the U.S. for people to sort of migrate to different states, for, job opportunities or simply to relocate their family, because it's easy to pick up and transition to a new city. But again, in Canada, I mean, the cities are not that large and the job prospects aren't that great. So you tend to see most people funnel into really the large two.
Yeah, I see, certain parties saying we'll put a 25% tax on foreign buyers. Are there any foreign buyers to tax?
Well, I mean, I have a few thoughts on that. I think that we know that there's, foreign money that influences our housing market. I just think that what we see is most of the foreigners, so to speak, quote unquote, are Canadian citizens or permanent residents, or their son goes to school here and he is a Canadian citizen, so the house gets purchased through him. So it's not really like a foreigner problem. Like, I mean, I just look at it and say, like, if you look at BC and Toronto, or BC and Ontario, which have, foreign buyers taxes. I mean, you have 20% foreign buyer tax here. Last time I checked, house prices hit an all-time high this year. They're up, 20, 30, 40%. So I don't know if that tax is necessarily working. It might have impacted the high end of the housing market in West Vancouver for, properties in the British properties, but it hasn't really helped improve affordability. And so, and it's the same problem. I know, you look at other countries, New Zealand has a foreign buyer ban. They're not allowed to purchase real estate there. They've been complaining this year about home prices accelerating to all-time record highs. They're now asking the Central Bank of New Zealand to include housing prices in their policy decisions. You've got Australia, which also has a foreign buyer ban. They can only purchase new housing construction. That has, last time I checked, Aussie house prices are hitting all-time highs. So it's a tough one to tackle. I think it's a multifaceted problem. I don't say that you should look at banning them per se, but I think that it's not the be-all, end-all. I think the biggest thing here really is the cost of capital. And if you look at it today, we had inflation just come out at 4.1%, and, people are getting variable rate mortgages for 1.29. I mean, what do you think's going to happen? Of course, housing is going to go higher. You've got, you're borrowing at a real rate of negative 3%.
If people are moving out of the city, where are they going?
Again, same sort of thing seems to be the suburbs. So, right, we've got a huge populist movement into the Fraser Valley. Here in BC, obviously Kelowna has been a popular destination. People cashing out of Vancouver, taking their riches, so to speak, to Kelowna, inflating the prices over there. Vancouver Island's been extremely popular. So yeah, I think those are Vancouver Island, Kelowna, and obviously the Fraser Valley have been the largest benefactors of the last 18 months.
When people sell and move out of the city, where are the buyers for their city property coming from?
I just think it's impossible to pinpoint that, but I think there's always people moving back to the city. I mean, if you're Vancouver here and you're a major global city and one of the most desirable places to live, there's always a new buyer coming in. It's just, it's impossible for me to pinpoint where every one of them is coming from, but, despite the rhetoric that, cities are dead or whatever, I mean, again, if we look at, what house prices are doing in the city here, like, you go look at like a house in East Vancouver, detached East Vancouver house prices, I mean, they're up 20+% over the last year. So, the city is still doing extremely well. I mean, it hasn't seen the same rate of price appreciation as the suburbs, but I mean, don't get me wrong, they're still up a ton.
Yes, Vancouver still always rates in the top 3 most desirable cities in the world to live in. And I can't imagine there's very many places where you can golf, sail, and ski in the same day. 'Cause I've done it.
Yeah, no, I know. We're definitely fortunate to be here. I mean, obviously, high housing prices, I suppose, come along with that. And it's certainly debilitating for a lot of people, and I understand the frustration. And but yeah, I don't really see a whole lot here that's going to change in the near future. In terms of political policies coming in, especially this upcoming election, I don't think any of them really get to sort of the root of it, which we've kind of, discussed here earlier.
Are the banks currently liberal or conservative in their mortgage lending?
Yeah, we just, mortgage lending is quite, I don't know if the right word is loose, but it's, very, very strong. I think residential mortgage credit growth is running, last time I checked, was running at a 10-year high. So, I mean, that's certainly been, a big factor. I'm just, checking something out here. We have, residential, Canadian mortgage debt in the second quarter, net new mortgage flows, hit record highs in the second quarter. So there's a lot of borrowing going on, a ton of borrowing. And, the banks are obviously happy to extend that credit to these borrowers, to purchase housing, right? And so that's why we're seeing, record mortgage volumes, and you're seeing record housing sales. The two and two go hand in hand. And again, like I said, I mean, to me, it doesn't surprise me, because if you look at it, you've got not only a behavioral shift in people spending an inordinate amount of time at home, and wanting to sort of increase their digs, so to speak. But at the same time, again, I think the biggest one here is that you've got inflation at 4% and mortgage rates sub 1.5%. To me, people are being incentivized to take on mortgage debt, and they are. So I think that's the largest thing driving this housing market.
Are you personally looking at buying or selling any properties this fall?
Not personally, no. In a pretty good spot right now, and I've got a project that I'm working on developing actually in Calgary, so that's kind of taking my focus and obviously taking a little bit more capital and resources. So that's kind of where my focus is right now.
And just for people who, a little trivia here, people wonder how many Springfields are there in the United States, because that's The Simpsons, isn't it? Springfield?
Yeah.
Well, there are 34 states that have a city named Springfield or a community. However, the most common name for a community in the U.S. is Riverside, with 186 Riversides in the U.S.
Wow. Yeah, it's always funny, because I think you talk to people in the U.S., and they'll tell you, like, a very small town, like small town, like rural town in like the U.S. is like 100,000 people. And, like 100,000 people is like pretty much the size of Kelowna.
I was going to say, in Canada, that's almost big enough for a CFL franchise.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm looking here, like Victoria, the Google's telling me it's 92,000 people. So, it just kind of puts things into context, right? Like, so I said, like, the housing problem in Canada is so multifaceted, and I think one of them, again, is that, like, we just don't have very developed, major metro cities, and there's not a whole lot of alternatives to Vancouver, Toronto, and you can throw in, like I said, I like Calgary, and sure, you can throw in Montreal and, maybe Ottawa in there, but, there's not a whole lot of people that are gonna, if you're looking at if you're an immigrant and you're looking at the charts, there's a whole lot of people that want to move to Newfoundland and Manitoba, and so I think that, unfortunately, this is certainly part of the problem that we have to kind of understand.
And when you think about Canadian cities too, and we always talk about China has over 300 cities with over 1 million people. So places like Vancouver would just be a moderate-sized place.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I don't know. It's always interesting just to see it from like a global perspective. Like I said, I think that there's so many unique challenges to our housing market here, and you know that's certainly one of them. But you know we've talked about the rest of them. So, yeah, I think it's a tough uphill battle for any politician. So it'll be kind of interesting to see these upcoming elections, but I don't really think a whole lot's going to change regardless of whoever is in power.
Steve, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks for having me on.
My guest has been Steve Saretsky. He's a Vancouver-based realtor. You can find him online at stevesaretsky.com. You can find him on Twitter at Steve Saretsky. If you have any questions for Steve, you can send them to us, and we'll ask that question for you the next time we chat with him. You can send the question to info@housestreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at House Street. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.